He wasn't getting hurt. He was still standing. So why did he fall apart? Those are the questions fans ask after fights that don't seem violent enough to explain the outcome. There's no single punch to replay, no obvious turning point, no moment where everything clearly breaks. From the outside, the collapse feels confusing, almost random. The assumption is that fighters fall apart because they take too much damage, that something finally lands hard enough to shut things down, but that's not how most fights actually end. Pace doesn't knock you out. It removes your ability to recover between moments. Power tests durability. It asks whether your body can absorb a single, overwhelming impact. Pace test systems. It shortens breathing windows. It prevents posture from fully resetting. It forces decisions before recovery has finished doing its job. A fighter can survive power with one clean reset. One deep breath, one moment to recenter. Pace doesn't allow that. It keeps pressure constant enough that recovery never catches up. The body's always slightly behind. Movements still work, but they cost more. Reactions still fire, but they arrive later. Options quietly disappear. That's why some fights don't explode. They unravel. The fighter isn't hurt. They're depleted, still standing, but no longer able to reset. This video explains why pace breaks fighters faster than power, and why collapse often comes without a dramatic moment. If you want MMA explained with clarity instead of commentary, subscribe to Cage Reality. Because in fighting, what ends you isn't always the hardest hit. It's the moment you never recover from. Section 1. Why pace feels harmless. Pace is easy to underestimate because it rarely looks dangerous in isolation. There's no single moment where it announces itself. No strike that clearly changes the fight. No replay that explains everything in one frame. From the outside, it often looks like nothing more than activity, movement, feints, volume, pressure without consequence, and that's why fans dismiss it. If a fighter isn't wobbling, if they aren't bleeding, if they aren't being knocked down, the assumption is that they're fine, still competitive, still in control. But pace doesn't work by creating visible damage. It works by denying recovery. Every exchange forces a response. Every response costs energy, and every small cost matters more when there's no time to reset. Early in a fight, the body compensates. Breathing catches up. Posture restabilizes. Timing feels intact. Pace looks manageable because the systems underneath are still doing their job. That's the illusion. Pace feels harmless because its effects are delayed. The fighter absorbs it while everything still appears functional. But what's actually happening is that recovery windows are getting shorter. Breaths stop reaching baseline. Muscle tension lingers longer than it should. Decisions start being made with incomplete information because the body hasn't fully reset yet. None of that looks dramatic until it compounds. That's why pace is so effective against experienced, durable fighters. It doesn't challenge their toughness. It challenges their ability to recover over and over again without falling behind. And once recovery stops keeping up, the fight changes, even if nothing big has happened yet. That's when pace stops looking harmless. It starts deciding outcomes quietly before anyone realizes the decision has already been made. Section 2. What pace actually attacks. Pace doesn't attack strength first. It attacks recovery. That distinction matters because fighters rarely feel recovery failing in real time. They feel capable right up until the moment they aren't. The first thing pace takes away is breathing control, not exhaustion, misalignment. Breaths come in, but they don't reset the body fully. Oxygen arrives late. Tension stays longer than it should. The fighter keeps moving, but the baseline never fully returns. Next, pace degrades posture. Small things start to change. Stance narrows. Weight shifts forward. The spine stiffens. None of it looks dramatic, but posture is how the body absorbs force and maintains balance. When posture slips, every movement costs more. Timing goes next. Reactions still fire, but they lose reliability. A half-second delay turns clean defense into late defense. Distance feels harder to judge. The fighter isn't slower, they're reacting from a compromised system. This is where pace becomes deceptive. The fighter doesn't feel broken, they feel rushed, pressed, slightly behind. They're still thinking, still fighting, still standing. But decisions are now being made without full recovery supporting them. Finally, pace attacks choice. Options narrow. Movements that were available earlier become too expensive to use repeatedly. The fighter starts choosing what's survivable instead of what's optimal. Defense becomes reactive instead of preventative. Offense becomes occasional instead of structured. At no point does pace announce itself as danger. It just removes layers of support until the fighter is operating without margin. That's why collapse under pace feels sudden to viewers. The body didn't fail all at once. It lost protection piece by piece. And once enough pieces are gone, even ordinary moments become decisive. Section 3. Why power is easier to survive than pace. Power feels more dangerous because it's obvious. A hard shot lands, the body reacts, and everyone understands what just happened. There's a clear cause and a clear effect. If the fighter survives, the moment ends. The system gets a chance to reset. That's the key difference. Power is episodic. It arrives in bursts. Between those bursts, there is space. Space to breathe, space to recenter posture, space to reestablish timing and decision-making. Even after heavy damage, a fighter can sometimes recover enough to function again if the pace allows it. That's why you see fighters survive knockdowns and come back. The damage was severe, but the system was given time to stabilize afterward. Pace doesn't offer that space. Pace is continuous. It doesn't spike danger, it sustains it. Instead of overwhelming the body all at once, pace keeps the system from ever returning to baseline. Breathing never fully resets. Posture never fully settles. Timing never fully locks back in. Each moment bleeds into the next without a clean break. This is why fighters often say a fight felt harder than it looked. They weren't hurt in a dramatic sense. They were denied recovery. Power gives you a problem to survive. Pace removes your ability to solve problems at all. That's also why power-based fighters can sometimes fade quickly when faced with relentless pressure. Their moments are explosive, but their systems rely on pauses. When those pauses disappear, their effectiveness collapses faster than expected. From the outside, it looks like a sudden drop in quality. From the inside, it feels like fighting with fewer and fewer tools available. That's why pace is often more decisive than power. Not because it hits harder, but because it never lets the body catch up. Section 4. Real examples. How pace ends fights quietly. This pattern becomes clear when you look at fighters who rarely get knocked out clean, yet still break down under pressure. Take Max Holloway. Holloway doesn't rely on power to end fights. His damage comes from pace. He forces opponents to work every second, even when nothing lands clean. Over time, breathing never resets. Defense becomes reactive. By the later rounds, opponents aren't losing because they're hurt. They're losing because they can't recover fast enough to function. The same mechanism shows up with Colby Covington. Colby's pressure isn't overwhelming in any single moment. It's repetitive. Clinch entries, resets, strikes that don't look damaging on their own. But the constant demand erodes recovery. Fighters look fine early, then suddenly can't keep pace with exchanges that once felt manageable. You see it again with Kamaru Usman at his peak. Usman's pressure didn't rely on knockouts. It relied on denying comfort. Footwork, clinch pressure, repeated engagements. Opponents weren't being broken by impact. They were being stripped of the ability to reset between moments. Even later in careers, pace tells the story. Fighters like Frankie Edgar could still absorb shots, still stay conscious, still fight intelligently. But once recovery slowed, pace overwhelmed systems that had held up for years. In all of these cases, the outcome wasn't decided by one exchange. It was decided by what pace removed: recovery, posture, timing, until the fighter was still standing, but no longer fully functional. That's how pace ends fights. Quietly, consistently, and often before anyone realizes what's actually happening. Section 5. Why toughness makes pace more dangerous. Toughness is usually treated as protection. If a fighter can absorb punishment, keep moving forward, and refuse to break, we assume they're safer, more durable, better equipped to survive hard fights. Under pace, toughness does the opposite. Tough fighters stay engaged longer. They don't disengage early. They don't look for exits. They keep responding even when recovery is incomplete. That willingness is admirable, but it's expensive. Pace doesn't punish fragility, it punishes persistence. A tough fighter doesn't panic when breathing slips. They don't stop when posture degrades. They keep fighting through moments where a less durable fighter might disengage or slow the tempo. That means they absorb more exchanges on a compromised system. The body never gets a clean reset, recovery never fully returns, and each decision is made with slightly less support underneath it. And this is why some of the toughest fighters in the sport seem to decline suddenly. Not because toughness failed, but because toughness kept them exposed long enough for pace to do its work. From the outside, it looks confusing. He's still standing. He's not hurt. So why does he look worse every round? Because toughness allows a fighter to function without recovery for a while, and pace is designed to exploit that window. Eventually, the system underneath runs out of margin. The fighter is still willing, still trying, still standing, but they're operating without protection. That's when pace becomes decisive. Not by breaking toughness, but by outlasting it. Section 6, why fans notice it too late. Fans usually notice pace only after the fight has already shifted. Early on, everything looks fine. The fighter is upright. They're defending. They're throwing back. There's no visible damage to explain concern. From the outside, it feels like a normal, competitive fight. That's because pace doesn't announce itself as danger. It works below the surface. Recovery doesn't disappear all at once. It shortens. Breaths don't stop. They just stop reaching baseline. Posture doesn't collapse. It stiffens. Timing doesn't vanish. It becomes less reliable. Each change is small enough to ignore on its own. So viewers keep waiting for a big moment. They expect a knockdown, a clean shot, a clear mistake. When the fighter finally falls apart, it feels sudden because the warning signs never look dramatic. The body crossed a threshold quietly, without a single frame you can rewind and blame. That's why commentary often sounds confused. He looks tired. He's slowing down. He's not himself tonight. Those statements are usually accurate. They're just late. By the time the slowdown is visible, the damage is already done. Recovery has been compromised for minutes. Options have been shrinking without notice. The fighter isn't reacting to the opponent anymore. They're reacting to their own limitations. Once that happens, outcomes accelerate. Rounds that once felt manageable become draining. Exchanges that once could be reset become decisive. And moments that wouldn't have mattered earlier suddenly end the fight. That's why pace always feels like it comes out of nowhere. It doesn't. It just finishes quietly, long after the work was already done. Section 7. The trade-off. Pace versus power. Every fighting style carries a trade-off. Power-based styles concentrate risk. They create moments that can end fights quickly for either side. When power lands clean, the outcome is immediate. When it doesn't, there is often space to reset and recalibrate. Pace works differently. Pace spreads risk over time. It doesn't aim to end the fight in one exchange. It aims to make every exchange slightly harder than the last. Power asks one question at a time. Can you survive this? Pace asks a different one. Can you keep recovering? That difference changes how failure appears. Power leads to visible endings, knockdowns, stoppages, clear moments everyone can point to. Pace leads to functional collapse. Movement slows, decisions narrow, defense becomes reactive. The fighter is still present, still trying, but operating without margin. Neither approach is better in every situation. They simply move risk to different places. Power risks everything at once. Pace risks everything slowly. That's why pace is often misunderstood. It doesn't look dangerous early. It doesn't feel dramatic in highlights. But once it has done its work, there is no clean way back. Recovery doesn't suddenly return. Systems don't reset because the fighter wants them to. The trade-off is simple. Power gives you the chance to end things quickly or lose quickly. Pace removes the possibility of quick endings altogether. And once a fight reaches that point, the result is rarely surprising. It's just unavoidable. Fights don't always end with a single moment you can point to. Sometimes they end because recovery never came back, because posture never fully reset, because pace quietly removed the ability to keep functioning. That's why fighters can still be standing and still fall apart. Power ends fights loudly. Pace ends them early, not with one strike, but by taking away the systems that let a fighter recover between moments. That's the part most people miss when they talk about toughness, heart, or damage. Cage reality exists to slow these fights down and explain what's actually happening underneath the action. The decisions, the trade-offs, and the costs that only become visible after the fact. If you want MMA explained beyond highlights and commentary, subscribe to Cage Reality. Because in fighting, what ends you isn't always what hits the hardest. It's what you never recovered from.